Open up! This house belongs to my husband. Rebecca's voice cut through the wood of my door like lightning. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was on the other side, wide awake, waiting. I knew she would come. After what happened yesterday, after I had thrown them out of my house with documents in hand, I knew my daughter-in-law wouldn't stay quiet. But I never imagined she would bring locksmiths. I heard heavy footsteps on my porch, male voices murmuring, the unmistakable sound of tools clanking against each other. Rebeca had arrived with professional backup to force open my door, to break into my house, the house that I bought, the house I paid for over 30 years with my own sweat. "Ma'am, we're private locksmiths." The man's voice sounded bored, routine, as if this were just another job in his day. "We were hired to open this door. We suggest you step aside if you are inside." For him, it probably was. For me, it was a declaration of war. "Hear that, Theodora?" Rebeca yelled again. And now her voice had that triumphant tone that so characterized her. "We are coming in, whether you like it or not. You should have thought things through before you threw us out like dogs. My husband has rights to this property." I stayed put, sitting in my living room with a cup of cold coffee between my hands. My 68 years of life had taught me many things, but the most important lesson I learned late. There are people who only understand when you show them consequences. The noise started. First, it was a metallic whir, then a sharp screech that made me grit my teeth. They were using an electric drill on my lock. On the lock I installed myself 10 years ago, when I finally had enough money to upgrade my home security. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. 30 years. 30 years working from dawn to dusk to buy this house, cleaning offices at night, taking care of other people's children in the mornings, saving every dollar as if it were the last, sacrificing vacations, new clothes, outings, everything, absolutely everything, to have a place of my own, a place where no one could kick me out, a place where I called the shots. And now my own daughter-in-law was out there, destroying my lock, screaming that the house belonged to her husband, to my son. The son I raised alone after his father abandoned us when Elias was just 3 years old. The son to whom I gave everything I could, and much of what I couldn't. The son who one day showed up at my door, saying he needed to stay just a few days while he sorted out problems with Rebeca. Those few days turned into 8 months. And in those 8 months, my house stopped being mine. "Almost there," Rebeca yelled. Keep going, this old woman can't hide forever. Old woman." She called me an old woman as if it were an insult, as if having survived 68 years in this world, having raised a son alone, having built something from scratch with my own hands, was a cause for shame. I got up from the armchair slowly. My knees protested, but I ignored them. At this age, the body always has something to say, but you learn to ignore it when there are more important things at stake. I walked to my bedroom without making a sound. The drill continued to buzz, getting closer and closer to breaking the last barrier between my space and Rebecca's invasion. But I wasn't in a hurry. I had been awake all night planning this moment. I knew exactly what to do. I opened my closet and pulled out the bag I prepared yesterday afternoon. Inside were 4 large bottles of ketchup, the cheapest at the grocery store, because I wasn't going to waste my money on this. There were also old rags, clothes I no longer wore, and a jar of red food coloring I had kept for years from when I tried to dye some curtains. It never worked for the curtains, but now it would have the perfect use. I poured the ketchup into a large container. I added the food coloring. The red became more intense, darker, more unsettling. I soaked the rags one by one. I scattered them across the entrance floor, forming an irregular trail. I took one of my old dresses, completely soaked it, and dropped it near the door as if someone had lost it in the middle of a struggle. Every detail counted. Every stain had to be in the right place. I took off the clean clothes I was wearing and put on an old housecoat full of paint stains. I dumped more ketchup on it. I smeared it over my arms, my neck, letting it drip down my clothes. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. I looked like something out of a nightmare. Perfect. The drill suddenly stopped. I heard a metallic click. The main lock had given way. Rebecca let out a cry of victory, as if she had just conquered a kingdom. Yes, that's it. Now open it. I knelt on the floor next to the door, in the middle of the red puddle I had created. I took a deep breath. Once. Twice. 3 times. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. But it wasn't fear. It was something different. It was determination. It was justice. The handle began to turn, slowly at first, then with more force. Rebecca was pushing the door from outside, but I had put on the internal safety lock, that little latch that can only be opened from the inside, the one she never knew existed, because in 8 months living in my house, she never bothered to really get to know it. "It won't open," she shrieked in frustration. "There's another darn safety lock." I heard the locksmith explain something to her in a low voice. Rebecca interrupted him with a scream. "I don't care. Break it. Do whatever you have to do." The drill started up again, this time more aggressive, more violent. I felt the whole door vibrating, the wood creaking under the pressure. My home, my refuge, my sacred space, was being violated by people who never respected it. The noise became deafening. The door trembled one last time. And just when I heard that the last lock was about to yield, just when I knew they were seconds away from breaking in, I grabbed the handle from the inside, and I opened the door myself. The door swung open, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. Rebecca froze on the threshold. Her eyes were so wide they looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. Her mouth formed a perfect O, but no sound came out of it. Behind her, the 2 locksmiths dropped their tools. The drill hit the porch with a metallic thud that echoed down the street. And then the screaming began. The younger locksmith backed away so fast he tripped over his own feet and fell onto my steps. The other put his hands on his head and started repeating over and over, "Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!" Rebecca finally found her voice. "Oh, Theodora, Theodora, what did you do? What did you do?" I stayed there, kneeling on the floor, covered in red, with my soaked housecoat hanging from my shoulders. I looked at all of them without saying a word. I let them see the full scene. The puddle on the floor, the stained rags, my clothes, my skin. All that intense red that in the dim morning light could look like anything but ketchup. The windows of the neighbouring houses began to light up one by one. I heard doors opening, alarmed voices asking what was happening. Mr. Hector, my 80-year-old neighbour, came out in his pyjamas with his cane in his hand. "What is all this commotion at 6 o'clock in the morning?" Rebecca turned towards him with her eyes full of tears, pointing at me as if I were a monster. "Her. Look what she did. She's crazy. Completely crazy. Call the police. Call an ambulance." I got up slowly, very slowly, letting every movement be visible, letting every gesture tell its own story. I leaned against the doorframe and looked at all of them with a calm that only comes after making the right decision. "You," I said, "just forced entry into private property at 6 o'clock in the morning, without a warrant, without the owner's permission. There are witnesses." The older locksmith blinked several times as if waking from a dream. "We," she said. "She told us it was her house." I shook my head slowly. This house is in my name, only my name. I have the deeds. I have all the documents. And you broke in by force, hired by someone who does not live here and has no legal right to this property. More windows opened. More neighbours came out. Mrs. Ottilia, who lived 3 houses down, approached with her phone in her hand. I already called the police. They are on their way. Rebecca turned towards her hysterically. Yes, good. Let them come. Look what this woman did. She hurt herself on purpose to make me look bad. She's demented. I simply smiled, a small, calm smile. The smile of someone who knows exactly what she is doing. Hurt myself? I asked, raising my clean arms from under all the ketchup. I don't have a scratch, Rebecca. But you just brought locksmiths to force open my door. At 6 o'clock in the morning, after I asked you yesterday to leave my house and not come back. The young locksmith stood up, staggering. We didn't know anything about this. She told us it was her house, that her mother-in-law had locked her out. We're just doing our job. I know, I said in a soft voice. And that's why I'm not going to press charges against you. But I suggest you leave right now before the police arrive, and this gets more complicated. The 2 men didn't need to be told twice. They gathered their tools at top speed and almost ran to their truck. In less than a minute, they had disappeared down the street. Rebecca stood alone in front of me, trembling with rage. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Her face was red, not the color of ketchup, but of the pure fury that was consuming her inside. This is not going to end here, she hissed through clenched teeth. Elias has rights. He's your son. He lived here. This house is his too. I leaned against the doorframe and looked her directly in the eyes. Elias lived here as a child, yes. I raised him here. I paid for this house alone for 30 years while I worked 2 jobs. When he turned 18, he left. He made his life. He married you. And I continued to live here, alone, paying my bills, maintaining my space. Rebecca opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up a hand. 8 months ago, he came to my door telling me he needed to stay a few days, that you were having problems, that he needed time to think. I let him in because I am his mother, and because this will always be his home when he needs me. But that doesn't mean it is his property. And what about me? She yelled. I'm his wife. I left my life to come live here. Your life? I repeated, and this time my voice was harsher. What life did you leave, Rebecca? You don't work. You have never worked. You live off Elias's salary. And Elias's salary hasn't existed for 8 months because he was fired and hid it from me for months. I saw her face turn pale. I had hit the bullseye. Yes, I know, I continued. I know he was fired in February. I know you have been living off my savings. I know the credit card he took out secretly is in my name. I know the bills that weren't paid are because you used that money for other things. Silence fell over the street like a heavy blanket. The neighbours who had come out stared at us without disguise. Mr. Hector took a step closer, leaning on his cane. Rebecca, is that true? She ignored him. She continued to look at me with a hatred so intense I could almost touch it. You never wanted me here, she said with a trembling voice. From the first day you made me feel like I was in the way, that I wasn't good enough for your precious son. I shook my head tiredly. I accepted you into my house, Rebecca. I gave you a place to sleep when you had nowhere to go. I shared my food, my space, my life. The only thing I asked for in return was respect. And the only thing I received was you moving my furniture without asking, throwing away my things because you didn't like them, criticizing every decision I made in my own house. Because this house was stuck in the past, she exploded. Everything old, everything ugly, everything boring. It needed life. It needed respect, I corrected her. And you never had it. Sirens began to sound in the distance. Rebecca heard them, and something in her expression changed. Suddenly she looked less sure, less triumphant, more frightened. When the police arrive, I said calmly, I am going to show them my deeds. I am going to explain that yesterday I asked you to leave. I am going to tell them that today, at 6 o'clock in the morning, you brought locksmiths to force entry. And I am going to let them decide what to do with that. She took a step back. Elias won't let you do this to me. Elias, I said, and for the first time my voice broke a little. Elias is not here. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? You came alone. You brought locksmiths. You forced my door. But my son is not with you. I saw her eyes fill with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of powerless rage. He's at the hotel, she whispered. I told him to wait for me, that I would take care of this. Of course you did, I replied, because that's what you always do. You take care of things. You make decisions for him. You speak for him. And my son lets you because it's easier than facing you. The sirens were getting closer. 2 patrol cars turned the corner and parked in front of my house. The police officers got out of the cars with that tired expression of those who have seen too much. One of them was young, maybe 30 years old, with an impeccable uniform. The other was older, grey at the temples, and with a way of walking that said he had been doing this for many years. The older officer approached first, looking at the scene. Me covered in red at the entrance, Rebeca trembling on my steps, the neighbours forming a semicircle around my house as if this were a spectacle. Who called the police? I did, officer, said Mrs. Ottilia, raising her hand. I heard shouting and very loud noises starting at 6 o'clock in the morning. I thought someone was in danger. The young police officer approached me cautiously, as if I were about to break at any moment. Ma'am, are you injured? Do you need an ambulance? I shook my head and raised my arms so he could see them clearly in the dawning morning light. I am not injured, officer. This is ketchup. I used it to protect myself. The 2 police officers exchanged a confused glance. The older one narrowed his eyes. To protect yourself? From what? I pointed towards Rebeca, who was now sitting on the bottom step with her face hidden in her hands. This lady is my son's wife. 8 months ago they came to stay temporarily in my house. Yesterday I asked them to leave because the situation became unsustainable. This morning at 6 o'clock, she returned with 2 locksmiths to force open my door. The neighbours can confirm it. Mr. Hector stepped forward, leaning on his cane. It's true, officer. I saw everything. She arrived yelling that the house belonged to her husband, that she was going to enter whether Mrs. Theodora wanted it or not. She brought 2 men with tools. I heard the drill. We all heard it. Other neighbours nodded. Mrs. Ottilia raised her phone. I recorded part of the commotion. If you need evidence, here it is. The older police officer turned to Rebeca. Ma'am, is this true? Did you hire locksmiths to force entry? Rebeca looked up. Her eyes were swollen and red. When she spoke, her voice sounded broken, victimized, completely different from the aggressive tone of a few minutes ago. This is my husband's home, she said through sobs. She kicked us out yesterday for no reason, without giving us time to collect our things. She left us on the street as if we were animals. I only wanted to get back what is ours. The young officer took out a notebook. Is the house in your husband's name? Rebeca hesitated. I saw her eyes darting around, looking for an answer that sounded convincing. He is her son. He lived here his whole life. He has a right. That's not what I asked, the officer said patiently. Is the property legally in your husband's name? I stepped into my house without saying a word. I went directly to the drawer where I keep all my important documents. I carefully pulled them out, those papers that represented 30 years of my life, of sacrifice, of work. I returned to the door and handed them to the older officer. This is the property deed. As you can see, it is solely in my name, Theodora Salazar. I bought it in 1995. I made the last mortgage payment 8 years ago. There is no other name on these documents. The police officer took the papers and reviewed them carefully. His partner came closer to look as well. Several minutes passed in silence while they examined each page. Everything appears to be in order, the older one finally said, returning the documents to me. The property is yours, Mrs. Salazar. Only yours. He turned to Rebeca with a harsher expression. Ma'am, you have no legal right to this property. Forcing entry into a house that is not yours constitutes attempted trespassing. The owner asked you to leave, and you returned with locksmiths to break in. That is a crime. Rebeca jumped to her feet, wiping away her tears with rage. But my husband lived here. He's her son. She can't just kick him out like that. The young officer spoke this time, in a softer but firm voice. If your husband lived here as a guest of his mother, then he does not have automatic property rights. The lady has every right to ask you to leave if she feels the situation is no longer working, and you have an obligation to respect that decision. What about our things? Rebeca yelled. We have clothes, personal items, everything is inside. I took a deep breath before answering. Your things are packed in boxes in the living room. I prepared them yesterday after you left. Everything is there. You can take them whenever you want, with police supervision if necessary to avoid further conflict. The older officer nodded. That sounds reasonable. Ma'am, he looked at Rebeca, you can go inside with us to collect your belongings. After that, you will have to leave, and you cannot return without the owner's permission. Understood? Rebeca clenched her fists, but nodded. The hatred in her eyes was palpable, but she no longer had an argument. She no longer had power. The four of us went into the house, myself, Rebeca, and the two officers. The scene inside was even more dramatic, with the natural light starting to stream through the windows. The red puddle at the entrance shone disturbingly. The scattered rags, my soaked clothing strategically discarded. The young police officer whistled under his breath. It's definitely ketchup, he said after kneeling down to smell it. Nice trick, ma'am. I didn't smile. There was nothing funny about this. It had just been necessary. In the living room, just as I said, there were 5 perfectly sealed cardboard boxes. I wrote the names on each one with a black marker. Elias. Rebeca. Inside was all the clothing they had left lying around my house for months. The bath products that filled my bathroom. The books Rebeca stacked in my living room. The shoes Elias left by the entrance. Everything that wasn't mine. Everything that had invaded my space. Rebeca looked at the boxes, and something in her expression broke. As if only at that moment did she understand that this was real, that she really had to leave, that she had lost. You spent all night packing this, she said with a hollow voice. All night, I confirmed. Because I knew you would come back. I know you, Rebeca. I know you don't take no for an answer. I know you think if you yell loud enough, if you push hard enough, you'll get what you want. She looked at me with tears streaming down her cheeks. Why do you hate me so much? I shook my head, suddenly tired. So tired. I don't hate you, Rebeca. I don't even really know you. In 8 months living under my roof, you were never interested in knowing me. You never asked about my life, my work, my dreams. You only cared about what this house could give you. The space, The comfort, the feeling of having something without having earned it. "I gave up my apartment to come here," she shouted. "I gave up my life." "What apartment?" I asked. "The apartment you weren't paying for because Elias was paying the rent with the money I lent him every month. I know that too." I saw her face turn pale again. How many secrets did they keep? How many lies? The older officer coughed uncomfortably. "Ladies, I think this conversation is personal. Ma'am," he looked at Rebecca, "I suggest you take your things and leave. If you have more to discuss, do it another time and in another place." Rebecca knelt beside the boxes and began to check them with trembling hands, as if she didn't trust that I had put everything in. She took things out, looked at them, put them back in. The young police officer looked at me with something that resembled compassion. "Do you need help cleaning all that up?" He gestured to the red mess at the entrance. I shook my head. "No, thank you. I can do it myself. I've done it before." I wasn't just talking about the ketchup, and I think he understood that. It took Rebecca 20 minutes to check all the boxes. Finally, with red and swollen eyes, she nodded. "It's all here." "Do you need help loading them into a car?" the older officer asked. She shook her head. "I'll call Elias. He can come get them." She took out her phone and dialed. I could hear the ringing tone. Once, twice, 3 times. No one answered. Rebecca tried again. Same result. And one more time. "He's not answering," she said in a small voice. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Rebecca tried to call Elias 5 more times while we were all standing in my living room. Every call went straight to voicemail. Every time she heard the automatic tone, her face grew paler, more desperate. Finally, she lowered the phone and stared at the screen as if she could force him to appear, just by wishing hard enough. The older officer looked at his watch impatiently. "Ma'am, we can't stay here all morning waiting. Do you have any other number to call? Any family or friends who can help you with the boxes?" Rebecca shook her head slowly. Her hands trembled, holding the phone. "I don't have anyone else. My family lives in another state. My friends—" Her voice trailed off. She didn't finish the sentence, but I could fill in the blanks. Rebecca had burned all her bridges when she married Elias. She had left her previous life behind, convinced that my son was her ticket to something better. "I can call a cab," the young police officer offered, "to take you wherever you need to go with your things." She nodded weakly, like a broken doll. All that aggressive energy from the morning had evaporated. Now all that was left was a 32-year-old woman who suddenly realized she was completely alone. The officer made the call. The cab would arrive in 15 minutes. We stayed in an uncomfortable silence while we waited. Rebecca sat on the floor next to her boxes, hugging her knees. I stood near the window, watching the street where the neighbors were finally starting to go back into their homes now that the show was over. Mr. Hector was the last to leave. Before entering his house, he waved to me. I waved back. He had witnessed everything. He knew the truth. That was important. "How long have you been living here?" the older officer asked, breaking the silence. 8 months, I replied. They arrived in February saying it would only be temporary, that Elias had a problem at work and they needed time to regroup. "And what really happened?" "He was fired," I said, looking directly at Rebecca. "In January. But they didn't tell me until 3 days ago, when a letter arrived from the bank about a credit card he took out in my name without my permission." The police officer whistled under his breath. His partner shook his head. "That's financial fraud, ma'am. You could press charges." "I know," I said, "but he's my son, and no matter how angry I am, how betrayed I feel, he's still my son." Rebecca raised her head and looked at me with something that might have been surprise or perhaps gratitude, but she didn't say anything, not even thank you. The cab arrived, honking outside. The two officers helped load the boxes into the trunk and the back seat. There were 5 large boxes, but they managed to fit them all. Rebecca stood on my steps, looking at my house as if she were memorizing every detail. "This didn't have to end like this," she finally said in a husky voice. "No," I agreed. "It didn't have to end like this. But it ended this way because you chose to force a door instead of knocking on it. Because you chose to yell instead of talk. Because from the first day you entered my house, you decided that I was the obstacle and not the person who was giving you refuge." She pressed her lips together. For a moment I thought she was going to argue, that she was going to launch one last barrage of accusations. But she didn't. She simply turned and walked toward the cab. Before getting in, she stopped and looked at me one last time. "Elias will be back. He's your son. You can't just leave him." I didn't answer, because the truth was I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything when it came to Elias. The boy I raised, the sweet child who hugged me every night before going to sleep, that boy had disappeared a long time ago. The man he had become was a stranger who lied to me, stole my identity, and hid in a hotel while his wife forced my door. The cab pulled away and disappeared down the street. The police officers stayed a few more minutes to finish their report. The older officer handed me a card. "If there is any other problem, anything at all, you call us directly. And ma'am, about the credit card, you really should consider pressing charges. Your son is an adult. Actions have consequences." "I'll think about it," I promised, though we both knew I probably wouldn't. When they finally left, the street was silent. I closed the door and leaned against it. Only then did I allow myself to tremble. Only then did I let the full weight of the morning fall onto my shoulders. I looked at the mess in my entryway, the red puddle that was already starting to dry, the scattered rags, my soaked housecoat, all the theatre I had staged to protect myself. It had worked. I had scared off the locksmiths. I had made the neighbours call the police. I had achieved exactly what I needed. But now I had to clean it up. I took off the housecoat and let it drop into the puddle. I went to the kitchen and filled a bucket with hot water and soap. I grabbed the mop and returned to the entrance. Kneeling on the floor, I began to clean the ketchup that had stuck to the tile. The water turned pink as I cleaned. I had to change it 3 times before the floor began to look normal again. It took me 2 hours to clean everything. 2 hours of scrubbing, rinsing, and drying. 2 hours in which I didn't think about Elias or Rebeca or anything else except returning my house to its normal state. My refuge, my space, my place in the world. When I finished, I showered with water so hot it left my skin red. I washed my hair 3 times until it stopped smelling like tomatoes. I put on clean, comfortable clothes, my favourite pajamas, even though it was barely 10 o'clock in the morning. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat down in my armchair, the one Rebecca had tried to throw away because she said it was too old. It was old. It was 20 years old. I bought it when Elias went to college. It was the first piece of furniture I chose just for myself, without thinking of anyone else. And it was comfortable. And it was mine. I sat there, drinking my coffee, looking at my living room that was finally only mine again. The empty spaces where Rebecca's things had been now looked spacious, clean. I could breathe again. My phone rang, startling me. I pulled it out of my pocket, expecting to see Elias's name on the screen. But it wasn't him. It was an unknown number. I hesitated a moment before answering. "Hello? Mrs. Theodora Salazar?" "Yes, that's me." "Good morning, Ma'am. I'm calling from First National Bank. We have some irregularities we need to discuss with you regarding a credit card opened in your name in March of this year. My stomach tightened. The card. Of course. It wasn't over. None of this was really over. Yes, I know about that card. My son took it out without my permission. I just found out a few days ago. I understand. Well, ma'am, we have a pending balance of $4,200, and the minimum payment is 2 months past due. $4,000. I felt as if someone had punched me in the stomach. $4,000 that I didn't spend. $4,000 on things I didn't even know what they were. I did not authorize that card, I said with a trembling voice. I didn't sign anything. I didn't order anything. I understand, Mom, but the card is in your name and with your social security number. If someone committed fraud, you will need to file a police report and work with us to resolve the situation. In the meantime, the debt remains your legal responsibility. I closed my eyes. Of course. Of course, the debt was my responsibility. Everything was always my responsibility. What do I need to do? The bank representative explained the process to me. Report the fraud, fill out forms, submit documentation, prove that I did not make those charges, possibly testify against my own son if the bank decided to press criminal charges. Everything was so complicated. Everything was so exhausting. When I hung up the phone, I kept staring at the screen. Still no message from Elias. No call. Nothing. My son, who had lived in my womb for 9 months. My son, whom I breastfed and rocked and cared for when he was sick. My son, for whom I worked 2 jobs for years, so he could have new clothes and school supplies and a safe roof over his head. That son had robbed me. He had lied to me. And now he didn't even have the courage to call me. 3 days passed with no word from Elias. 3 days in which my phone remained silent. 3 days in which every time the doorbell rang, my heart jumped, but it was always someone else. The mail carrier, a salesman, Mr. Hector asking if I was okay. During those 3 days, my house regained its rhythm. I got up early, as I always had. I made my coffee. I watered my plants. I did the grocery shopping alone, carrying my bags without anyone's help, as I had done for years before they arrived. It was strange at first. The house felt very quiet. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was peace. On the 4th day, I went to the bank. I took all the documents I could gather. Bank statements, the letter that had arrived, my identification. I sat down at a desk with a young lady named Cecilia, who looked at me with that mix of pity and professionalism that people use when they know you're in trouble. Mrs. Salazar, I reviewed your case. Indeed, the card was opened in March with your personal information. Do you have any idea how your son obtained your documents? I was living with him, I replied with a tired voice. Or rather, he was living with me. He had access to everything. Cecilia nodded while typing on her computer. The charges are mainly at restaurants, clothing stores, a jewelry store, and several online payments. Do you recognize any of these establishments? She showed me the screen. I read line by line. Expensive restaurants, where I had never set foot. Brand name stores, where one blouse cost what I earned in a week. A jewelry store with a charge of $1,200. I remembered the necklace Rebeca started wearing in April, that gold necklace with a bright pendant that she said Elias had given her for their anniversary. He bought it with my money, with my name, with my credit. I don't recognize any of them, I finally said. I didn't spend a single cent on that card. Cecilia handed me some forms. I need you to fill this out. It is a fraud declaration. You will also need to file a police report. The bank will investigate. And if we determine that it was indeed fraud, we will cancel the debt and close the card. And if my son admits that he used it, she looked at me seriously, then the bank may decide to press criminal charges against him. We are talking about identity fraud and theft. These are serious crimes. He's my son, I said, and my voice sounded broken. I know, Mom, and I'm very sorry you are going through this, but he committed a crime, and you have to protect yourself. I took the forms with trembling hands. Cecilia offered me a glass of water, which I gratefully accepted. How long do I have to fill this out? Ideally, you should do it as soon as possible. The longer you wait, the harder it is to prove the fraud, and the debt keeps growing with interest. I left the bank with a folder full of papers and a weight in my chest that had nothing to do with money. I walked the 4 blocks to my house, feeling every one of my 68 years. My knees hurt. My back hurt. My heart hurt more than anything else. When I reached my door, someone was waiting. Elias. My son was sitting on my steps with his head in his hands. When he heard me arrive, he looked up, and what I saw broke my heart. His eyes were red and swollen. He hadn't shaved in days. His clothes were wrinkled. He looked defeated. "Mom," he said, and his voice sounded like it did when he was a child and had done something wrong. I stood in front of him without saying anything. The bank folder weighed like lead in my hands. Elias stood up with difficulty. "I need to talk to you. Please, give me 5 minutes." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to hug him, tell him everything would be okay, fix everything as I had done when he was little. But another part, the part that had matured in these last few days, knew that would be a mistake. 5 minutes, I finally said, opening the door. We went into the house. Elias looked around as if it were the first time he was seeing it. The empty spaces where Rebecca's things used to be, the cleanliness, the order. Everything was back to the way it was before they arrived. "It looks nice," he said in a low voice. "It looks like when I was a kid." We sat in the living room. I was in my old armchair. He was on the couch I had bought 15 years ago, and that had survived all of Rebecca's attempts to replace it. The silence stretched between us like an abyss. "Rebecca left," he finally said. "She took a bus back to her mother's house. She left me a message saying she couldn't take it anymore, that this was my problem, not hers." "And what did you expect?" I asked, unable to help myself. "This whole situation is because she wanted something that wasn't hers, because you played along." Elias ran his hands over his face. "I know you're right, but at the time, Mum, I just wanted peace." She kept pressuring, and it was easier to say yes than to confront her. Just as it was easier to take out a credit card in my name than to tell me the truth about your job. He flinched as if I had hit him. "I was going to tell you. I swear I was going to tell you. But every day that passed made it harder. And Rebecca said if I told you, you would kick us out. That it was better to keep it a secret until I got another job." "And the job? Did you get it?" He shook his head, looking at the floor. "I've sent hundreds of applications. No one calls me. And when they call and see my age, 43 years old, they look for someone younger, someone they can pay less." "That's no excuse to steal from me, Elias." "I know." His voice broke. "I know, and I am so sorry, Mum. You don't know how sorry I am." I picked up the bank folder and placed it on the coffee table between us. $4,200. That's what you spent using my name. Restaurants, clothes, a necklace for your wife who isn't even here to wear it now. I saw tears begin to roll down his cheeks. "I'm going to pay it back." I don't know how, but I'm going to pay it all back. Every single cent. With what money, Elias? You don't have a job. You don't have savings. Your wife left. Where are you going to get $4,000? He sobbed openly now, like a small child. I don't know, but I will find a way. I promise you. I watched him cry and felt something break inside me. It wasn't pity. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something deeper and more painful. It was the understanding that my son, the boy I raised to be good, should be good and honest, had become someone capable of lying to me and robbing me. The bank wants me to file charges, I said in a low voice. They say it's the only way to cancel the debt, that if I don't, I will have to pay every cent myself. Elias's head snapped up, his eyes wide. No, Mum, please. If you file charges, I'll have a criminal record. I'll never get a job. My life will be over. Your life is already complicated, Elias, and so is mine because of what you did. But I'm your son, he said desperately. I'm your only son. You can't do this to me. And there it was, the manipulation, soft, covered in tears and desperation, but manipulation nonetheless, just like Rebeca, just like always. Precisely because you are my son is why this hurts so much, I replied. Because I expected more from you. Because I raised you better than this. You did, he admitted. You raised me well. It was me who failed. I made the wrong decisions. I let Rebeca convince me of things I knew were wrong. I was weak. Being weak is not a crime, Elias, but stealing is. He slumped against the back of the couch, exhausted. What do you want me to do? Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. I took the fraud forms out of the folder. I want you to sign this. It is a confession admitting that you opened the card without my permission and that you made all the charges. With this, the bank will cancel the debt in my name. And then what? Are they going to arrest me? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. It depends on the bank. But Elias, if you don't do this, I will have to pay those $4,000 myself. And I don't have it. My savings barely cover my expenses. I cannot carry a debt that is not mine. Elias looked at the forms as if they were a death sentence. His hands trembled when he took them. He read each line slowly, his lips moving silently as he processed the words. Confession of fraud. Unauthorized use of personal information. Charges made without the cardholder's consent. I don't have a pen, he finally said in a hollow voice. I took one out of my purse and handed it to him. He took it, but didn't uncap it. He stared at the paper, then looked at me, then back at the paper. If I sign this, will you forgive me someday? The question took me by surprise, not because it was unexpected, but because I didn't have a prepared answer. Would I forgive him? Could I forgive this? I don't know, I answered honestly. Right now I am very tired, Elias. Very tired and very hurt. For 8 months I opened my house to you. I gave you my food, my space, my peace. And in return I received lies, theft, and a daughter-in-law who tried to force my door at 6 o'clock in the morning. I didn't know Rebeca was going to do that, he said quickly. I swear. That morning I woke up and she was already gone. She left a note saying she was going to fix things. When I saw your message about the police, I almost died of fright. And why didn't you come right away? Why did you wait 3 days? Because I'm a coward, he admitted, and new tears began to roll down his cheeks. Because I was afraid to face you. Because I knew I had failed you in the worst possible way, and I didn't know how to look you in the eye. Well, here you are now, I said. looking me in the eye. And here is the document that will begin to fix at least the financial part of this mess. Elias uncapped the pen with trembling hands. He held it over the paper for what seemed like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, with a deep sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, he signed. His name appeared on that line like a confession, like an end, like a beginning, too, perhaps. He handed me the papers, and I carefully put them away in the folder. I would go to the bank again this afternoon. I would turn this in, and hopefully in a few weeks, the debt would disappear from my name. But the damage to our relationship, that wouldn't disappear so easily. "Where are you staying?" I asked after a long silence. "In a cheap hotel near the bus terminal. $22 a night. It's all I can afford with the little I have left." "And after that? What are you going to do when you run out of money?" He shrugged, defeated. "I don't know. Look for a shelter, maybe. Or sleep in my car. We'll see." A part of me, that maternal part that never dies no matter how much they hurt you, wanted to offer him to stay, to tell him he could come back, that we could try again. But I bit my tongue, because I knew it would be a mistake, because I knew nothing had really changed. He was still unemployed. He was still weak under pressure, and I was still his safety net, the one who always rescued him. But I couldn't keep rescuing him anymore, not at the expense of my own stability. "You have to find a job, Elias. Any job. It doesn't matter if it's not what you studied or what you want to do. You need income." "I've applied everywhere," he said with frustration. "Grocery stores, restaurants, warehouses. No one calls me." "Have you gone in person? Have you talked to the managers directly?" He shook his head. "Everything is online now. They don't even let you drop off physical resumes." I got up and went to my bedroom. I came back with $200 in cash. I had taken it out of the ATM yesterday, part of my budget for the month's groceries. I held it out to Elias. He looked at the money without taking it. "I can't accept this, Mum. I've stolen enough from you." "It's not a gift," I said firmly. "It's a loan. With this, you can pay for the hotel a few more days while you really look for work. And when you get something, you give it back to me. Every cent." He finally took the money carefully, as if it were sacred. "Thank you," he whispered. "I will pay you back. I promise you." Elias's promises no longer meant much to me, but I nodded anyway. "There is something else I need to tell you," I continued. "You cannot come back to live here, not the way you did before. This is my house, my space, my peace. I opened it for you when you needed it, and you destroyed that peace. You and Rebeca." "I know," he said with a broken voice. "And I am so sorry. We let it get out of hand." "You let it get out of hand. It wasn't just that it got out of hand, Elias. You made active decisions to take control away from me in my own house. You moved furniture without asking me. You threw away my things. You decided what was cooked, what was watched on television, how everything was organized. You made me feel like a guest in the place I bought with my own sweat." He covered his face with his hands. "Rebeca said she was just modernizing, that your house needed changes. And I let her because it was easier than arguing. And what about what I needed? What about my comfort, my opinion, my feelings?" "You're right," he admitted. "We didn't think about you. We only thought about ourselves, about what we wanted, about how to make things more comfortable for us, without considering that it was your space, not ours." I sat down in my armchair again, feeling the weight of all those years, of all the times I gave in, of all the times I kept silent to keep the peace, of all the times I put the needs of others before my own. For 30 years I worked to have this house, I said slowly. 2 jobs, double shifts. I sacrificed vacations, new clothes, outings with friends, all so you could have a good home, so you could study without worries, to give you what your father never gave us. Elias sobbed. And I wasted it all. Everything you did for me. You didn't waste it all, I corrected him. You graduated, you got good jobs, you had a life. But at some point you stopped valuing the effort behind all of that. You stopped seeing that the world doesn't owe you anything, that everything is earned through work. I'm sorry, Mum. I'm so sorry. I know you're sorry, Elias. But feeling it is not enough. You need to change, truly change. He nodded again and again, like a child being scolded. I'm going to change. I promise. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to pay you back everything I owe you. I'm going to prove to you that I can be the son you deserve. I wanted to believe him. With every fibre of my being, I wanted to believe that this time would be different. But I had heard these words before. When he lost his first job. When he got into credit card debt the first time. When Rebecca and he had their first big fights. There were always promises. There were always tears. There was always this time it will be different. But it never was. Stand up, I finally said. He looked at me confused but obeyed. I need you to understand something very important. I will always be your mother. I will always love you. But loving does not mean allowing you to destroy me. Loving does not mean being your eternal safety net while you make irresponsible decisions. I understand, he whispered. I don't think you understand, I said firmly. Because if you understood, you never would have taken out that card. You never would have let Rebecca disrespect me in my own house. You never would have allowed her to try to force my door with locksmiths. He opened his mouth to reply, but I raised my hand. No, let me finish. These last few days, since you left, my house has felt like a home again. I wake up without anxiety. I drink my coffee in peace. I don't have to hide my important things. I don't have to tiptoe around in my own space. And I realized something. I am tired, Elias. I am 68 years old, and I am profoundly tired of carrying everyone's problems. Mum, I don't want to be a burden. But you are, I interrupted him. And you have been for a long time, since you were 20 years old and I was still paying for your phone, since you were 25 and I lent you money for the down payment on your car that you never paid back, since you were 30 and I helped you with the rent 3 months in a row. I have always been there to rescue you, and you have always known I would be there, so you've never really had to stand on your own 2 feet. The words hurt to say, but they were true, every single one. Elias was weeping openly now. So what? You don't want anything to do with me anymore? I shook my head. I will always want to hear from you. You are my son, but the relationship has to change. I can no longer be your savior. You have to save yourself. Elias stood in front of me with the $200 clutched in his hand, as if it were the only solid thing in a world that was crumbling around him. His eyes were still red, swollen from crying so much. But there was something else in his expression now, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Maybe it was genuine shame. Maybe it was the beginning of understanding. Can I at least call you? He asked in a small voice, to tell you how I'm doing. You can call me, I replied. But I am not going to give you money every time you call. I am not going to solve your problems. I can listen to you. I can advise you. But you have to walk this path yourself. He nodded slowly. What if things really go badly for me? What if I end up on the street? The question hit me hard, because I knew what he was doing. He was looking for that crack, that little piece of my maternal heart that always gave in, that part that couldn't bear the idea of my son suffering. But this time I held firm. Then you'll have to go to a shelter, or ask friends for help, or talk to social services. There are resources for people in your situation, Elias. Resources that aren't you. I watched his face fall as he realized that this time I wouldn't give in. This time there was no going back. I love you, he said suddenly. I know I messed everything up. I know I don't deserve it. But I love you, Mum. I love you too, I replied, and it was true. But love is not enough. It never has been. He walked toward the door, dragging his feet as if every step cost him a monumental effort. On the threshold, he stopped and turned one last time. I'm going to prove to you that I can change. I don't know how long it will take me, but I'm going to do it. Don't prove it to me, I said. Prove it to yourself. I watched him walk down the steps and down the street until he disappeared around the corner. Only then did I close the door and lean against it. My whole body was shaking. It had been one of the hardest conversations of my life, but also one of the most necessary. I spent the rest of the day in a strange state. I went to the bank and turned in the documents signed by Elias. Cecilia assured me that the process would take a few weeks, but that with the signed confession, it was very likely that they would cancel the debt. I left there with one less weight on my shoulders, but a new one on my heart. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened in the last few weeks, about how my life had taken such a drastic turn, about how I had found a strength I didn't know I had. In the following days, I established a new routine. I got up early, did light exercise in the living room, and ate breakfast peacefully while reading the newspaper. I worked in my small garden, which had been neglected for months. Rebeca hated me spending time there because she said the dirt under my fingernails looked awful. Now I could get my hands as dirty as I wanted. Mr. Hector started visiting me in the afternoons. We drank coffee on my porch and talked about everything and nothing. He told me stories of when his wife was alive, of how he missed her but had learned to be alone without feeling lonely. I told him about my work all those years, about the things I sacrificed and the things I gained. One afternoon, while we were sharing cookies I had baked, he asked me something no one else had dared to ask. Do you regret kicking them out? The question caught me by surprise. I stared at my coffee cup, watching the steam rise in spirals. Sometimes, I admitted. There are moments when I miss having Elias around. I miss the idea of having family at home. But then I remember how I felt when they were here. Invisible in my own house, used, disrespected. And then I know I did the right thing. Mr. Hector nodded wisely. Being a good person doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. My wife taught me that. She said goodness without limits isn't kindness, it's self-destruction. She was right, I said. It took me 68 years to learn it, but she was right. It's never too late to learn, he replied with a smile. My wife used to say that too. 2 weeks passed. Elias called 3 times. The first call was 2 days after our conversation. He sounded hopeful. He had gotten an interview at a warehouse. The second call was a week later. He hadn't gotten that job, but he had another interview scheduled. The third call came exactly 14 days after I kicked them out. Mom, he said, and there was something different in his voice. I got a job. I felt my heart skip a beat. Really? Yes, at a grocery store, stocking shelves and helping in the back. It's not much. They pay $11 an hour, but it's something. It's a start. I was silent for a moment, letting the words sink in. I'm proud of you, I finally said. And it was true. I know it's not what you studied, but it's a step. I start tomorrow, he continued. 6 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon shift. And Mum, I talked to the manager. I explained my situation about the debt. He said we can set up an arrangement so they deduct something from each check to start paying you back. You don't have to do that immediately, I said. You need to stabilize yourself first. No, his voice sounded firm. This is important. You loaned me those $200. I signed that confession that could get me in trouble. The least I can do is start paying you back. The conversation was short. He had to go get his uniform and prepare for his first day. When I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time. Maybe, just maybe, this time it really would be different. The bank called me 3 days later. Cecilia sounded relieved when she spoke. Mrs. Salazar, I have good news. We reviewed your case, and with the signed confession and the investigation of the charges, we have determined that you were a victim of identity fraud. We are going to completely cancel the debt of $4,200. Your credit will be clean. I felt as if a cement block had been removed from my chest. And what about my son? Are you going to press charges? There was a pause. That decision is in the hands of the legal department. But given that he confessed and you are direct family, it is possible that it will only be registered in our internal system and they won't proceed legally. I can't promise you anything, but it's probable. When I hung up, I cried. Not from sadness or relief, exactly. I cried for everything that had happened, for the betrayal, for the pain, for the strength I had to find, for my son who finally seemed to be growing up. I cried for myself and for everything I had sacrificed. Mrs. Ottilia knocked on my door that afternoon. She brought a cake she had baked. You look different, she said as we sat in my living room. Lighter, somehow. I feel different, I admitted. I feel like I can finally breathe. Did you hear anything from your son? I told her about the job, about the calls, about the bank cancelling the debt. I'm happy for you, she said sincerely. And I'm happy for him too. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom to start climbing up. I didn't want him to hit rock bottom, I said. I wanted to protect him from that. But I think by protecting him so much, I made him weaker. You weren't the one who made him weak, she corrected me. Life does that sometimes. But giving him the chance to get stronger, that was all you. That night, alone in my house, I made myself a simple dinner. Homemade soup with toasted bread. I sat at my small table, the same one where Elias and I had eaten thousands of meals when he was a child. The same one Rebecca complained was too old and needed to be replaced. But this table had history. It had memory. It had value that couldn't be measured in money. I ate slowly, savoring every spoonful, enjoying the silence. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence filled with peace, of possibility, of a future that was finally mine again. 1 month after Elias started working, he showed up at my door on a Saturday afternoon. He was wearing his grocery store uniform, stained with sweat and work. His face looked different, thinner perhaps, but also more awake. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. "Hi, Mum," he said when I opened the door. "Can I come in for a minute?" I hesitated for just a second before stepping aside. He came in and looked around as he always did now, as if he were visiting a museum of his own history. "I just came from work," he explained, pointing to his clothes. "I worked a double shift today. The manager said I can take extra hours whenever I want." "That's good," I said, leading him to the living room. "Do you want water? Coffee?" "Water is fine." I went to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses. We sat in our usual places. He drank almost the entire glass in one gulp. "I have something for you," he said, pulling an envelope from his back pocket. "It's the first payment." I took the envelope, feeling how heavy it was in my fingers. I opened it. There were $100 in small bills. "Elias, this is—" "I know it's not much," he interrupted me. "And I know I owe you much more than $200. There's the $4,000 from the card, even though the bank cancelled your debt. But I spent it. I owe it. So I'm going to pay you back everything, little by little. But I'm going to do it." I stared at the money. Tens and fives, some crumpled, probably from tips he had earned helping customers load their groceries into their cars. "You don't have to pay me the $4,000, I said. "The bank resolved it." "But I spent it," he insisted. "I spent $4,200 of your credit on things we didn't need, on expensive restaurants to impress Rebeca, on clothes to look good, on a necklace that cost more than you spend on food in 3 months." His voice broke on the last words. "So I'm going to pay you back. Not because the bank requires it, but because it's the right thing to do, because it's what I owe you." I put the money back in the envelope and left it on the coffee table. "How are you really doing?" I asked. "Where are you living?" "I got a room in a shared house," he replied. $300 a month. I share a bathroom and kitchen with 3 other tenants. It's not luxurious, but it's clean and safe." "And food?" "I eat at work. Employees get a discount. And at home I cook simple things: rice, beans, eggs, like you used to do when I was a kid and money was tight." It surprised me that he remembered. Those years when every dollar counted, when food was functional, not elaborate, when there was no money to waste. "And Rebecca?" I asked. "Have you heard anything from her?" "She called me 2 weeks ago," he said, looking at his hands. "She wanted me to come back to her. She said her mum was sick of having her at home, that if I got a good job, we could rent an apartment together again." "And what did you tell her?" That I need to be alone for a while, that I need to figure out who I am without someone else telling me what to do or what to think." I saw something in his expression that filled me with hope. It was clarity. It was the first time in years Elias had spoken about himself with that certainty. "She got really angry," he continued. "She said I was a loser, that she wasted her time with me, that I would never find anyone better than her." "And how did you feel when she said that?" "Relief," he admitted. "Because I realized she was right about one thing. I'm not going to find someone better than her. I'm going to find someone different. Someone who doesn't make me feel like I have to apologize for existing." I felt something swell in my chest. Pride, perhaps, or hope, or simply maternal love watching her son finally wake up. "There's something else I want to tell you," Elias added after a silence. "About everything that happened. About Rebecca trying to force the door." I waited without saying anything. "When I saw your message that morning, when I read about the locksmiths and the police, I thought she had gone crazy. But later, when I talked to her, I realized something. She wasn't crazy. She was desperate. And I had made her that way." "You made her desperate?" "I promised her things I couldn't keep," he explained. "I told her the house would be ours someday, that you were older, and that when you couldn't take care of yourself anymore, we would keep everything. I made her believe it was just a matter of time." His words hit me like a slap, not from surprise. Deep down, I had always suspected it, but hearing it from his mouth was different. "Why?" I asked in a quiet voice. "Why would you tell her that?" "Because it was easier than admitting I had nothing," he replied with shame. "That I had lost my job, that I didn't have any money, that I was completely dependent on you. It was easier to make her believe that this was temporary, that there was a plan, that eventually we would have something of our own. But there never was a plan. No, he admitted. There was never a plan. There was only hope that something miraculous would happen, that I would get an incredible job, that I would win the lottery, that you would decide to give us the house. Give you my house? I repeated incredulously. He nodded miserably. Rebecca said it was fair, that you had lived your life, that now it was your turn to help us live ours. And I listened to her because I wanted to believe it made sense, because it was more comfortable than facing reality. The reality that I am a 43-year-old adult who can't take care of himself, he continued with a broken voice, that I have always depended on you, that I never truly grew up. The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear the wall clock ticking the seconds. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the weight of all these truths finally being spoken aloud. Thank you for telling me this, I finally said. I know it wasn't easy. You had to know, he replied, because I can't truly change if I keep carrying secrets, and because I owe you honesty. It's the least I can do after everything. He stayed a while longer. He told me about his co-workers, about the manager who had given him a chance despite his age, about an older lady who shopped at the grocery store every Thursday and always asked for his help specifically because, she said, he was polite and patient. Small stories of a life he was building from scratch, an honest life, even if it was humble. When he left, it was getting dark. I watched him walk toward the bus stop because he still didn't have a car. I watched him wait under the street lamp, and when the bus arrived and he got on, I stayed at the window watching him drive away. That night I counted the $100 he had given me. I folded them carefully and put them away in an old tin where I kept emergency money. Not because I urgently needed it, but because that money meant something more than its monetary value. It meant effort. It meant change. It meant that maybe, just maybe, my son was finally growing up. Mr. Hector came to visit me the next day with flowers from his garden. You look happy, he observed as I put the flowers in a vase with water. Elias came yesterday, I told him. He brought me money, his first payment. And that made you happy? It's not the money, I explained. It's what it represents. It's seeing him try. It's seeing him take responsibility. Mr. Hector nodded with wisdom. Sometimes the best thing we can do for the people we love is let them fall, so they can learn that they can get up on their own. You were right, I said. Your wife was right about a lot of things. She was a wise woman, he replied with a sad smile. And you are too, Theodora. It took you time to realize it. But you are. That week I received a letter from the bank. It was official. The debt was completely cancelled. My credit was clean. There would be no criminal charges against Elias, since he had confessed, and I was the direct victim and had agreed not to proceed legally. Everything was resolved, at least on paper. But the real resolution, I realized, was not in the bank documents or in the $100 stored in my tin. It was in being able to sleep peacefully at night, in being able to drink my coffee in the mornings without anxiety, in being able to walk through my house without feeling like an intruder. It was in having recovered my life, my space, my peace, and in knowing that no matter what happened with Elias, I was going to be okay. Because I had finally learned that saving someone who doesn't want to save themselves only drowns you. And I was no longer willing to drown for anyone, not even for my own son. 6 months had passed since that morning when Rebecca tried to force my door. 6 months in which my life had transformed in ways I never imagined possible at 68 years old. It was a Saturday morning and I was in my garden, pruning the plants that had finally bloomed after months of constant care. There was something deeply satisfying about watching something grow under your attention, in knowing that your effort yielded real and tangible results. Mr. Hector was sitting in a chair he had brought from his house, drinking lemonade and telling me about his granddaughter who would be visiting him next week. Mrs. Ottilia walked by, waving on her way to the market. My street felt like a real home, not just my house, the whole street. "Theodora, you have a visitor," Ottilia shouted, pointing toward my entrance. I looked up and saw Elias getting out of a car I didn't recognize. But what caught my attention the most wasn't the car. It was how my son looked. He had gained some healthy weight. His clothes were simple but clean and well kept. He walked differently, with his back straighter, with his shoulders less slumped. "Hello, Mum," he said with a genuine smile. "Hello, son. Whose car is that?" "It's mine," he replied with evident pride. "Well, the bank's technically, but I'm making the payments myself. It's used, a 2012, but it runs well." I took off my gardening gloves and walked toward him. Mr. Hector waved at us and discreetly went into his house, giving us privacy. "You look good," I said, and it was true. "I feel good," he replied. "Better than I've felt in years. Can I come in?" We went into the house. He looked around as he always did, but this time there was something different in his expression. It wasn't nostalgia. It was appreciation, as if he finally saw the space for what it was. My home, not his entitlement. I sat in my armchair. He sat on the couch. Between us, there was a physical distance that represented something deeper, a respect, a healthy boundary. "I have news," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "I got promoted at the grocery store. I'm a shift supervisor now, $3 more per hour." "Elias, that is wonderful. And there's more," he continued, and his voice trembled a little with emotion. "I started taking online classes, business administration. It's a certificate program. I finish in 8 months." I felt my eyes fill with tears, tears of genuine pride, of seeing him finally becoming the man I always knew he could be. "I am so proud of you," I said with a broken voice. He held out the envelope to me. "This is for you, $500. I know I still owe you much more, but I'm going to keep paying, every month, until everything is settled." I took the envelope, but put it on the coffee table without opening it. "How are your finances? Can you afford to give me this and still live well?" "I have a budget," he replied. "I wrote down all my expenses, the rent, the food, the car, the classes, the utilities. And after all that, I have $500 for you and a little for savings. It's not much, but I'm learning to live with what I have." Those words were worth more than any amount of money. "Tell me about the classes," I asked. "What's it like to be studying again?" "It's hard," he admitted. "Sometimes I get home from work so tired I can barely keep my eyes open. But I like it. I like feeling like I'm building something, that I'm moving forward instead of just surviving." We stayed talking for more than an hour. He told me about his routine, how he woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning to study before work, how he had made friends at the grocery store, hard-working and honest people, how one of his co-workers was teaching him to cook more elaborate but economical meals. "And Rebecca?" I asked finally. "I haven't heard anything from her in 4 months," he said. "The last time we spoke, she told me she had met someone else, someone with money. She wished me luck and hung up." "How did you feel?" "Relieved," he replied without hesitation. "And sad, too. I'm not going to lie. Not because I missed her specifically, but because she represented years of my life that I wasted trying to be someone I wasn't." "Those years weren't wasted," I said. "They taught you who you don't want to be. And that is valuable too. He nodded thoughtfully. You know, Mum, sometimes I think about that morning, when Rebecca came with the locksmiths, when you opened the door and you were covered in that red. We all thought you had hurt yourself. I smiled slightly at the memory. Ketchup, 4 bottles and red food colouring. He let out a laugh that sounded surprised and admiring. It was brilliant. Terrifying, but brilliant. The locksmiths ran off. The neighbours called the police. You achieved exactly what you needed without hurting anyone. Sometimes women like me have to be creative, I said. We don't always have physical strength. We don't always have economic power. But we have intelligence. And we have determination. You taught me something that day, he continued. You taught me that you don't have to be aggressive to be strong, that you can defend yourself without losing your dignity. I hope so, I replied, because that's what I tried to do, defend what was mine, protect my space, but without turning into something I'm not. Elias stayed a while longer. We drank coffee. We ate cookies I had baked that morning. We talked about simple, everyday things, about how the weather was changing, about how Mr. Hector had painted his house a cheerful yellow colour, about how Mrs. Ottilia had adopted a stray cat. Small conversation that build real relationships, not those based on need or dependence, but those based on genuine affection and mutual respect. When he was getting ready to leave, he hugged me. A long, tight hug. The kind of hug that says everything words cannot. I love you, Mum, he whispered against my shoulder. And I'm so sorry for everything I put you through. I love you too, I replied. And I forgive you, but more importantly, I'm glad to see that you are forgiving yourself. I watched him leave in his used car, paid for with his own effort. I watched him drive carefully down the street, and I felt at peace. That night, alone in my house, I counted the money he had brought me. $500 in $20 bills. I added them to the tin where I kept the previous payments. There was almost $1,000 there now. Money earned through honest work. Money given with respect and responsibility. I made myself a simple dinner. Vegetable soup with homemade bread. I sat at my table, the same one Rebecca wanted to throw out, and ate slowly, savouring every bite. There was no hurry. There was no tension. There was only peaceful silence and the satisfaction of a day well lived. After washing the dishes, I went out onto my porch. The night was cool and clear. The stars were shining brightly. Mr. Hector was on his own porch and waved to me. I waved back. I thought about the whole journey, about the woman I was 6 months ago. That woman who allowed her space to be invaded because she was afraid of being alone. Who accepted disrespect because she believed that was how family peace was maintained. Who made herself small in her own home so others could feel big. That woman no longer existed. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who set boundaries and kept them, who knew that love does not mean sacrificing yourself until you disappear, who understood that sometimes the best way to help someone is to let them face their own consequences. My house was mine again. My days were mine again. My life was mine again. There were moments of loneliness, I won't lie. There were nights when I missed having someone else in the house. But I had learned the difference between solitude and peace, between being alone and feeling lonely. I was alone by choice, and I was at peace also by choice. At 68 years old, I had discovered something that many women never discover, that your value is not in being useful to others, that your home is not measured by how many people fill it, but by how much peace it contains. That true family respects, not invades. That real love supports, not drowns. I stayed on the porch until the cold forced me inside. I locked the door. My door. My new lock that I installed myself after they destroyed the old one. I went to sleep in my bed, in my room, in my house. And I slept deeply, without sudden awakenings, without anxiety, without fear. Because finally, after a lifetime of giving and giving and giving, I had learned to give myself the most important thing: dignity, respect, and peace. And that was priceless. That was all I had ever needed. And now, finally, I had it.